Snoop Dogg, one of the most famous rappers in the world, was sitting in the living room of his luxurious home in Los Angeles, where he had lived for many years. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, creating a warm and comfortable atmosphere. He looked outside, where luxury cars glided past on the bustling street. Today was a special day, and Snoop felt excited about his flight to New York to participate in a major music event, where he would perform alongside many other famous artists. He had been preparing for this trip for weeks. Everything had been arranged perfectly. The plane tickets were booked, the performance outfit was carefully selected, and the songs had been rehearsed. Snoop Dogg always wanted to deliver the best performances for his fans, and this time was no exception. He had planned for an energetic show, featuring his famous hits and new tunes he had just composed. However, deep down, he still felt a bit anxious. Despite having flown many times in his career, Snoop couldn't shake off the nervousness that came with boarding a plane. Especially, he had heard many stories about racial discrimination on flights, and that made him uncomfortable. He recalled previous instances when he and his friends were treated differently, simply because of their skin color. Those memories were still fresh in his mind, and he couldn't help but worry about whether he would face similar situations on this flight. Snoop stood up and walked to his wardrobe, where he had prepared a special outfit for the event. It was a black suit with sparkling gold details reflecting his unique style. He knew he needed to stand out on stage, and this outfit would help him do just that. As he put it on, he felt more confident, but the anxiety still lingered. He returned to the living room and looked in the mirror. The reflection showed a man with a strong presence, but deep down, he still felt a twinge of unease. "I can't let this hold me back," he told himself. "I'm Snoop Dogg, and I've overcome many challenges in my life. Nothing can stop me." After checking everything one last time, Snoop decided to take a moment to relax before heading out. He sat down on the sofa and played one of his favorite hip-hop tracks. The music filled the room, and he felt his mood gradually lift. The familiar beats helped him forget his worries and focus on the positive. He thought about the fans waiting for him in New York, those who would come to enjoy the music and share their passion with him. As time passed, Snoop realized it was time to leave the house. He took out his phone and double-checked the flight information. Everything was on schedule, and he felt a bit relieved. He called his personal driver, who would take him to the airport. While waiting, he decided to go over the items he needed to bring. He pulled out his laptop, where he had stored his latest tracks, and a few books he wanted to read during the flight. When the driver arrived, Snoop stepped outside and took in the fresh morning air. He got into the car and began the journey to the airport. Throughout the ride, he gazed out the window, admiring the familiar streets of Los Angeles. Every corner reminded him of the beautiful memories in his career, from his first performances to collaborations with other artists. Upon arriving at the airport, Snoop Dogg felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He walked into the check-in area, where many passengers were waiting. He realized that he was not just a famous rapper, but also a cultural icon. Many fans recognized him and approached him for autographs and photos. Snoop was always happy to oblige. He knew that the support of his fans was the most important thing in his career. However, when he reached the check-in counter, he sensed something was off. The security staff looked at him with suspicion, even though he had presented his boarding pass and identification. Snoop felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. He had heard many stories about racial discrimination on flights, and now he couldn't help but feel anxious about whether he would face similar situations. As he passed through the security gate, a security officer, a middle-aged man, asked him to stop. "Sorry, but I need to conduct a further check," he said in a stern tone. Snoop Dogg felt frustrated, but he tried to remain calm. "Why am I being checked so thoroughly? I've flown many times and have never encountered this issue," he replied. The security officer didn't respond, continuing to inspect Snoop's bag. Snoop felt insulted and couldn't understand why he was being treated this way. He looked around and saw other passengers not being checked like he was. The feeling of injustice rose within him, and he decided that he would not remain silent. In that moment, Snoop Dogg realized that this flight was not just a journey to New York, but also an opportunity for him to stand up against racial discrimination. He knew he needed to raise his voice, not just for himself, but for all those facing discrimination. He took a deep breath, preparing for what was about to happen. As Snoop Dogg stepped into Los Angeles International Airport, the bustling and vibrant atmosphere immediately enveloped him. The sounds of laughter, the rolling of luggage across the floor, and the announcements echoing through the speakers created a lively ambiance. He felt excited, but there was also a hint of nervousness. This was an important flight, not just because of the upcoming music event, but also due to the complex emotions he was grappling with. Right as he entered, Snoop Dogg attracted the attention of many fans. They recognized him instantly and eagerly approached him for autographs and photos. Snoop had always been friendly and open with his fans. He smiled, signed for each person, and happily posed for pictures. These moments made him feel loved and appreciated, and he knew that the support of his fans was the most important thing in his career. "Thank you all so much. I'm going to put on a great show in New York," Snoop said with excitement in his voice. The fans cheered and clapped, creating a joyful atmosphere. He felt like he was on top of the world, but deep down, there was still a bit of anxiety about what lay ahead. After finishing with the autographs and photos, Snoop Dogg made his way to the check-in counter. He was ready with his boarding pass and identification in hand. However, as he approached, he sensed something was off. The security staff at the check-in counter looked at him with suspicion, as if he were a potential threat. Snoop felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. "Hello? How can I help you?" the security officer asked, but her tone was anything but friendly. Snoop Dogg smiled and handed over his boarding pass and ID. "I'm Snoop Dogg, and I have a flight to New York," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. The security officer stared at his documents, then looked back up at his face. "Can you tell me why you're taking this flight?" she asked, her tone still unchanged. Snoop felt insulted. "I don't understand why I have to explain my travel plans. I've flown many times and have never encountered this issue," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. The officer said nothing, continuing to scrutinize his documents. Snoop felt the tension in the air. He looked around and saw other passengers not being checked like he was. Some even looked at him with curiosity, as if they were witnessing an interrogation. The feeling of injustice rose within him, and he decided that he would not remain silent. "Is it because I'm a person of color?" Snoop asked, his voice tinged with anger. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to get on the plane and go to New York." His words echoed in the air, and some nearby passengers began to take notice of the conversation. The security officer maintained her cold demeanor. "I'm just doing my job," she said. "We have strict security procedures and you need to comply." Snoop felt as if he were being trapped in an unfair situation. He knew he needed to stand up against this discrimination. "Okay, but I can't accept the way I'm being treated," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm an artist, and I've dedicated my life to music. I'm not a threat." He felt the anger and indignation rising within him, but he also knew he needed to stay calm. A woman standing nearby, witnessing the entire situation, spoke up. "Why is he being checked so thoroughly? He's a famous artist," she said, her voice filled with outrage. Others around them began murmuring, expressing their dissatisfaction with how Snoop Dogg was being treated. Snoop felt a bit of comfort seeing someone stand up for him. He knew he wasn't alone in this fight. "Thank you," he said to the woman, and his gaze swept over the others who were supporting him. He felt strength from the solidarity of those around him. Finally, an airport manager, hearing the commotion, came over to intervene. He recognized Snoop Dogg immediately and apologized for the inconvenience. "We don't want to disturb you. We'll resolve this issue right away," he said in a friendlier tone. The security officer was finally forced to apologize to Snoop Dogg and let him pass without further checks. As Snoop Dogg walked through the security gate, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. However, he also knew that the fight against racial discrimination was far from over. He decided that he would not let these negative experiences hold him back. Instead, he would use his music to convey messages of equality and unity. As he walked toward the boarding gate, Snoop felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he could turn his painful experiences into strength. He would not just be an artist, he would be a voice for justice. And within him, a new fire had ignited, ready for the challenges ahead. As Snoop Dogg walked through the security gate, he felt a slight sense of relief after resolving the issue at the check-in counter. However, that relief quickly faded when he noticed another security officer waiting on the other side of the gate, a middle-aged man whose gaze was fixed on him as if he were a potential threat. Snoop felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. "Excuse me, can you please stop for a moment?" the security officer said in a stern tone. Snoop Dogg halted, feeling as if he were being scrutinized. "I need to conduct a further check," the man continued, showing no signs of friendliness. Snoop felt a simmering anger rising within him. He had been through a lot in his life, but he had never felt so distrusted simply because of his skin color. "What's going on?" Snoop asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've already presented my boarding pass and identification." He couldn't understand why he was being asked for additional checks while other passengers around him were passing through without any issues. They moved through the security gate with ease, none of them being questioned or checked like he was. "We have strict security procedures," the officer replied, but Snoop felt as if he were being given a flimsy excuse for the discrimination he was facing. "Can you open your bag for me?" the security officer requested, his tone still unchanged. Snoop felt insulted, but he knew he needed to remain composed. "All right," he said, trying not to let his emotions overwhelm him. He opened his bag and allowed the security officer to inspect it. As the man rummaged through his belongings, Snoop felt exposed under the gaze of the onlookers around him. He was not just a famous artist, he was a black man facing discrimination. The feeling of injustice surged within him, and he couldn't help but think of his friends who had experienced similar situations. "Do you have anything in here that I need to know about?" the security officer asked, his tone still filled with suspicion. Snoop felt as if he were being interrogated. "I just have some personal items and a few music tracks," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm an artist, and I'm on my way to a music event." The officer said nothing, continuing to search through Snoop's bag. He sifted through clothes and personal items, finally stopping at the laptop. "Can you tell me about these music tracks?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on Snoop. "Why do you need to bring a laptop on this flight?" Snoop felt as if he were being forced to explain everything. "I need it for work," he said, his voice tightening. "I'm preparing for a performance and I need to finalize some tracks." He couldn't understand why he had to justify his work to a stranger. "We just want to ensure the safety of all passengers," the security officer said. But Snoop felt as if he were being lied to. He had seen too many similar cases where people of color were treated differently simply because of their skin color. He couldn't help but feel angry and indignant. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of searching, the security officer returned Snoop's bag to him. "You can go," he said, but his tone remained unfriendly. Snoop felt as if he had just undergone an unfair interrogation. He walked through the security gate, but the feelings of anger and injustice lingered in his heart. As he made his way toward the boarding gate, Snoop felt as if he had just fought a battle. He was not only facing suspicion but also struggling with the negative emotions that this situation had brought upon him. He knew he needed to turn these painful experiences into strength. His music had always been a way for him to express himself, and now he would use it to convey messages of equality and unity. While waiting in the lounge, Snoop began to jot down a few lines on his laptop. He wanted to capture his feelings, the experiences he had just gone through. Music had always been his refuge, and he knew he needed to transform these emotions into a song. He wanted people to understand that racial discrimination was not just a personal issue, but a societal problem that needed to be addressed. As the announcement for boarding the plane was made, Snoop Dogg felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he was not alone in this fight. He could use his music to create change, to convey messages of equality and unity, and within him, a new fire had ignited, ready for the challenges ahead. As Snoop Dogg stepped out of the security gate, the feelings of anger and indignation still lingered in his heart. He couldn't understand why he was being treated this way, while other passengers around him faced no such scrutiny. However, what warmed his heart was the support from those around him. A white woman standing nearby who had witnessed the entire incident could no longer remain silent. "Why is he being checked so thoroughly? He's a famous artist," she exclaimed, her voice filled with outrage. Other passengers began to turn and look, some nodding in agreement with her. Snoop felt a bit of comfort hearing those words. He was used to fighting his own battles, but the support from others made him feel less alone. However, the security officer continued his work without changing his attitude. He didn't even look up, focusing intently on searching Snoop's bag as if he were a real threat. "This is blatant discrimination," the woman continued, refusing to back down. "He hasn't done anything wrong. Why does he have to endure this check while others don't?" Her voice rang out amidst the bustling noise of the airport, drawing the attention of many other passengers. A man standing nearby also spoke up. "That's right. I've seen many people pass through without any issues. This is racial profiling." He pointed at Snoop, clearly showing his support. Others began to join in the conversation, expressing their dissatisfaction with how Snoop Dogg was being treated. "We can't let this happen," another woman said, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to stand up against this discrimination. No one should be treated this way just because of their skin color." Her words resonated like a rallying cry, and a sense of solidarity began to form among the passengers. Snoop Dogg stood there, feeling a powerful surge of emotion rise within him. He was not just an artist, he was a symbol of the fight against discrimination. He knew that his music could convey a strong message about equality and unity. He felt as if he were in the midst of a larger battle, one that he could not stand aside from. The security officer, noticing the attention from the crowd, finally had to look up. "I'm just doing my job," he said, but his tone had begun to waver. "We have strict security procedures to ensure the safety of all passengers." But his excuses could not hide the fact that he had treated Snoop Dogg unfairly. "That's no reason to discriminate," the woman who had spoken first said. "He's not a threat. He's an artist, someone who brings joy to people." Her words rang out like a bell, causing many around to nod in agreement. Snoop felt his heart warm as he saw the support from those around him. He knew that not everyone could understand what he was going through, but the empathy from these passengers made him feel comforted. He was not alone in this fight. "We need to do something," another man said. "Maybe we should report this incident to the airport management. They need to know that this discrimination is unacceptable." The people around him began discussing how to respond to this situation, and Snoop felt a sense of hope rising within him. Finally, a man in airport management uniform appeared. He noticed the gathering crowd and approached. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone serious. The passengers began recounting the incident, pointing out that Snoop Dogg had been treated unfairly. "We can't let this happen," the woman who had spoken first said. "He's a famous artist and doesn't deserve to endure this discrimination." The airport manager listened, and Snoop felt a glimmer of hope as he saw the man nodding in agreement. "We will investigate this matter," the airport manager said. "We do not tolerate discrimination here. Every passenger deserves to be treated fairly." These words were a soothing balm for Snoop Dogg and his supporters. As the crowd began to disperse, Snoop felt a sense of relief wash over him. He knew that the fight against racial discrimination was far from over, but he also knew that he was not alone. The passengers around him had stood up for him, and that made him feel stronger than ever. As he boarded the plane, Snoop Dogg felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just an artist, he was a fighter for justice. His music would not only be a means of entertainment, but also a vehicle for conveying messages of equality and unity. And within him, a new fire had ignited, ready for the challenges ahead. As Snoop Dogg stepped onto the plane, his mind was still filled with thoughts about the incident that had just occurred at the airport. He couldn't shake off the memory of the security officer's suspicious gaze, nor the silence of those around him as he was being checked. He knew he couldn't let this slide without a response. It was time to speak up. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Snoop felt a surge of anticipation rise within him. He was not just an artist. He was a representative for those who had endured discrimination. He couldn't allow this injustice to continue without raising his voice. After the plane took off and stabilized at cruising altitude, he decided to confront the security officer to seek answers. When the plane reached cruising altitude, Snoop stood up and made his way to the back of the cabin. He found the security officer he had encountered earlier, who was still sitting in a corner looking unfriendly. Snoop took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his tone steady but firm. The security officer looked up, seemingly annoyed at being interrupted. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cold. "I want to know why I was treated differently from other passengers," Snoop said, his gaze fixed on the security officer. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I being suspected just because of my skin color?" Snoop's question echoed in the quiet cabin, drawing the attention of several passengers nearby. A few turned to look, while others began to whisper among themselves. The atmosphere grew tense, and Snoop sensed the support from those around him. The security officer appeared flustered by this confrontation. "I'm just doing my job," he said, but his tone began to waver. "We have strict security procedures to ensure the safety of all passengers." "But why was that procedure applied to me differently?" Snoop pressed, refusing to back down. "I saw many other passengers pass through without any issues. Why was I subjected to such a thorough check?" A middle-aged man sitting nearby stood up and joined the confrontation. "That's right. I saw that too. This is clear discrimination," he said, his voice filled with anger. "He's not a threat. He's an artist, someone who brings joy to people. Snoop felt his heart warm as he saw the support from the other passengers. He was not alone in this fight. "Thank you, man," Snoop said to the man, then turned back to the security officer. "I just want to know the real reason behind this check. I can't accept being treated like a criminal just because of my skin color." The security officer, now under pressure from both Snoop and the surrounding passengers, began to fumble. "I didn't mean to discriminate," he said, but his voice was no longer as confident as before. "We just want to ensure the safety of everyone." "But safety cannot be built on suspicion and discrimination," Snoop replied, his voice still resolute. "I've lived long enough to know that racial discrimination is not just a personal issue, it's a societal problem. I can't accept being treated this way." Another passenger, a young woman, stood up and said, "We need to stand up against this discrimination. No one should be treated this way just because of their skin color." Her words rang out like a rallying cry, and many other passengers began to nod in agreement. Snoop felt a powerful surge of emotion rise within him. He knew that this was not just his fight, but the fight of all those who had endured discrimination. "We need to create change," he said, his gaze sweeping over the passengers around him. "My music will not just be a means of entertainment. It will be a vehicle for conveying messages of equality and unity." The security officer, now feeling the pressure from both Snoop and the surrounding passengers, began to falter. "I didn't mean to discriminate," he said, but his voice was no longer as confident as before. "We just want to ensure the safety of everyone." "But safety cannot be built on suspicion and discrimination," Snoop replied, his voice still resolute. "I've lived long enough to know that racial discrimination is not just a personal issue, it's a societal problem. I can't accept being treated this way." This confrontation had drawn the attention of many other passengers, and the atmosphere became tense. Some began recording the incident on their phones, while others whispered among themselves about the injustice Snoop was facing. He felt as if he were standing in the midst of a larger battle, one that he could not step back from. Finally, the security officer, realizing he could no longer justify his actions, lowered his voice. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable," he said, but Snoop knew that this apology could not erase what had happened. "What's important is that we learn from our mistakes," Snoop said, his tone softer but still firm. "I hope that what happened today will help everyone realize that racial discrimination is unacceptable in any form." The confrontation ended, but Snoop knew that his fight was far from over. He had stood up for himself and for others, and that made him feel stronger than ever. As he returned to his seat, he felt a sense of pride swell within him. He was not just an artist, he was a fighter for justice and equality, and he would never remain silent in the face of injustice. As the atmosphere in the airplane cabin grew tense, the voices of Snoop Dogg and the security officer echoed among the passengers who were watching intently. Some had stood up to show their support for Snoop, while others whispered among themselves about the injustice he was facing. Just then, an airport manager, hearing the commotion from the cabin, quickly entered to intervene. He was a middle-aged man, dressed in a uniform with a shiny badge on his chest. As he walked in, his gaze immediately landed on Snoop Dogg. "Oh, Snoop Dogg," he exclaimed, his expression shifting from serious to surprised. "I apologize for this inconvenience. We didn't mean to disturb you." Snoop felt a sense of relief wash over him at the sight of the manager. He had hoped that someone would step in to resolve the situation fairly. "I just want to know why I was treated differently," Snoop said, his voice still firm but softening slightly upon seeing the manager. "We will address this issue immediately," the manager said, his gaze shifting from Snoop to the security officer. "I don't know what happened here, but I will ensure that he doesn't have to endure any further checks." The security officer, now under pressure from both Snoop and the manager, began to fumble. "I was just doing my job," he said, but his tone was no longer as confident as before. "We have strict security procedures." "That's no excuse for discrimination," the manager interrupted, his voice becoming stern. "He is a famous artist and does not deserve to undergo this check. We need to respect all passengers regardless of who they are." Snoop felt his heart warm at hearing these words. He knew that not everyone could stand up against discrimination, and the manager's intervention made a significant difference. "Thank you," Snoop said, his eyes reflecting gratitude. "I just want to be treated fairly." The manager nodded and then turned to the security officer. "I ask you to apologize to Snoop Dogg and let him pass without any further checks," he said, his tone serious. "We cannot allow suspicion and discrimination to tarnish the reputation of this airport." The security officer, now left with no other choice, bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry, Snoop Dogg. I didn't mean to disturb you. We just wanted to ensure the safety of all passengers." His voice sounded awkward, and Snoop sensed sincerity in that apology. "Thank you," Snoop replied, his tone softer. "I understand that your job is important, but discrimination cannot be accepted." He felt as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The manager turned back to Snoop, a gentle smile on his face. "We are very sorry for this inconvenience. I hope you have a comfortable and safe flight." He extended his hand and Snoop shook it, feeling the support from the manager. As Snoop returned to his seat, he felt a sense of relief and pride. He had stood up for himself and for others, and that made him feel stronger than ever. The surrounding passengers began to clap, showing their support for Snoop and the manager's intervention. "We need to continue fighting for justice," one passenger said loudly, and others nodded in agreement. Snoop felt as if he were not just an artist but also a representative for those who had endured discrimination. As the plane took off, Snoop looked out the window feeling a sense of freedom and hope. He knew that the fight against racial discrimination was far from over, but he also knew that he was not alone. The passengers around him had stood up for him, and that made him feel stronger than ever. Within him, a new fire had ignited, ready for the challenges ahead. He would continue to use his music as a means to convey messages of equality and unity, and he would never remain silent in the face of injustice. As the plane soared high, Snoop Dogg felt as if he were flying alongside it, overcoming all barriers and prejudices. He knew he could make a difference, not just for himself, but for all those who had endured discrimination. And with every note, every lyric, he would continue to fight for a fairer world. As Snoop Dogg stepped onto the jet bridge leading into the airplane, a sense of relief washed over him. Finally, after the tension and injustice he had just experienced, he could enter the private space of the cabin. However, that relief could not erase the thoughts swirling in his mind. He could not understand why racial discrimination still existed even in situations like this, where everyone deserved respect and fair treatment. As he found his seat, Snoop felt the eyes of other passengers on him. Some smiled, while others whispered among themselves. He knew that his presence was not just about taking a flight. It carried a powerful message about the struggle for justice and equality. He had decided that he would not let negative experiences hold him back. Instead, he would continue to fight for equality, not just for himself, but for all those who had endured discrimination. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Snoop looked out the window at the fluffy white clouds drifting lazily by. He recalled memories from the past, the times he had faced racial discrimination, from his early days in the industry to becoming a cultural icon. Each of those moments had brought him deep pain, but it was those experiences that had made him stronger. How can we change this? He wondered. How can people realize that racial discrimination is not just a personal issue, but a societal problem that needs to be addressed? These questions echoed in his mind, and he knew that music was the most powerful tool he could use to convey his message. As the plane took off, Snoop felt a sense of freedom fill his heart. He had often said that music could change the world, and now he felt it was his responsibility to make that a reality. He decided he would write a new song, one that not only spoke about discrimination but also about hope, unity, and the strength of community. While the plane soared higher, Snoop took out his phone and began jotting down ideas that came to him. He wrote about his experiences, the intervention of the airport manager, and the passengers who had stood up to support him. He wanted people to know they were not alone in this fight. Everyone could contribute to change, no matter how small. "We need to stand together," he wrote. "We need to create a world where everyone is respected regardless of their skin color or background." The words flowed from his soul, and he felt as if he were connecting with others through music. As the plane flew through the clouds, Snoop felt as if he were soaring alongside it, overcoming all barriers and prejudices. He knew that the fight against racial discrimination was not just his responsibility, but that of everyone. Each person could play a part in the change, and he wanted to be a part of that. As the plane stabilized at cruising altitude, Snoop looked around the cabin. He saw passengers chatting, laughing, and enjoying the flight. He felt a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps change was not impossible. Perhaps if people stood together, they could create a better world. Snoop Dogg decided that he would not stop at writing a song. He would organize a concert where people could come and share their stories. He wanted to create a safe space where everyone could express their feelings and experiences without fear of judgment. He wanted people to know they could find strength in unity. As the plane began its descent, Snoop felt a thrill of excitement. He knew he was about to arrive in a new city, where he could start a new chapter in his life. He would not just be an artist, he would be a fighter for justice. He would use his music to convey messages of hope and unity. When the plane touched down, Snoop felt a sense of readiness. He knew he was prepared for the challenges ahead. He would not let racial discrimination hold him back. Instead, he would continue to fight for equality, not just for himself, but for all those who had endured discrimination. He would be the voice for those who had no voice, and he would never be silent in the face of injustice. As he stepped off the plane, Snoop felt as if he were embarking on a new journey, a journey where he would not only be an artist, but also a fighter for justice. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face any challenge. With each step, he felt the power of music and unity, and he knew he was not alone in this fight. As the airplane glided through the fluffy white clouds, Snoop Dogg sat by the window, sunlight streaming through the glass, creating a warm and inspiring atmosphere. In his hand was his phone, where ideas and emotions flowed like a stream. He had decided that this flight would not just be a journey from point A to point B. It would be an opportunity to convey a powerful message about racial discrimination and call on everyone to stand up against it. Snoop began typing words on the screen, each phrase resonating like a rhythm in his mind. He recalled the tense moments at the airport, where discrimination had been glaringly evident. He felt the pain of those who had suffered discrimination, and he knew that music was the best medium to share those experiences with the world. "We cannot remain silent," he wrote. "We cannot let racial discrimination continue to exist in this society. Everyone has the right to be respected, regardless of their skin color or background." These words were not just part of a rap. They were a call to action, a reminder that each individual could contribute to change. As he wrote, images from the past flashed through his mind. He remembered the times he had faced discrimination, the suspicious glances, and the bitter words. But alongside those memories, he also recalled the beautiful moments, the people who had stood by him, those who had supported him in the fight against injustice. These memories fueled his motivation, and he wanted to share that with everyone. "Music has power," he continued to write. "It can connect us, make us feel that we are not alone. When we stand together, we can create change." He knew that music was not just a form of entertainment. It was a powerful tool for conveying messages and creating social change. Snoop began to write the first lines of his rap, each word flowing like a rhythm. He wanted this rap to be more than just a song. He wanted it to be a manifesto. He wanted everyone to feel the pain, the anger, and the hope in every line. He wanted them to understand that racial discrimination was not just a personal issue, but a societal problem that needed to be addressed. "Don't let discrimination hold you back," he wrote. "Stand up, speak your truth. We are a community, and we need to unite." These words served as a rallying cry, a reminder that everyone could contribute to change, no matter how small. As the plane continued to ascend, Snoop felt as if he were flying alongside the music. He envisioned the concert he would organize, where people could come and share their stories. He wanted to create a safe space where everyone could express their feelings and experiences without fear of judgment. He wanted people to know they could find strength in unity. "We need to stand together," he wrote. "We need to create a world where everyone is respected." These words were not just part of the rap. They were a call to action, a reminder that each individual could contribute to change. As the plane began its descent, Snoop felt a thrill of excitement. He knew he was about to arrive in a new city, where he could start a new chapter in his life. He would not just be an artist, he would be a fighter for justice. He would use his music to convey messages of hope and unity. When the plane touched down, Snoop Dogg felt ready for the challenges ahead. He would not let racial discrimination hold him back. Instead, he would continue to fight for equality, not just for himself, but for all those who had endured discrimination. He would be the voice for those who had no voice, and he would never be silent in the face of injustice. As he stepped off the plane, Snoop felt as if he were embarking on a new journey, a journey where he would not only be an artist, but also a fighter for justice. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face any challenge. With each step, he felt the power of music and unity, and he knew he was not alone in this fight. As he left the airport, Snoop Dogg felt energized. He had written a new rap, a song that not only spoke about discrimination, but also about hope, unity, and the strength of community. He knew that music could create change, and he would not stop fighting for a better world. As the plane landed at JFK Airport, Snoop Dogg felt a wave of excitement wash over him. New York City, with its bright lights and bustling energy, always gave him a sense of embarking on a new adventure. He was prepared for the major music event he would be attending, where he would not only perform his new rap, but also share his story about the racial discrimination he had faced during his flight. Stepping out of the airport, Snoop felt the vibrant atmosphere of the city. The sounds of honking cars, people chatting, and the hustle and bustle of urban life created a lively symphony. He knew this was a place where music could create change, and he was ready to convey his message to the world. After arriving at his hotel and resting for a bit, Snoop prepared for the performance. He wore a comfortable yet stylish outfit, with a hoodie and jeans, topped off with a baseball cap. Looking in the mirror, he reminded himself that this was an opportunity not just to showcase his talent, but to voice the struggles of those who had endured discrimination. Upon arriving at the event venue, Snoop felt the palpable excitement in the air. The crowd had gathered in large numbers, with fans and fellow artists eagerly waiting. The flashes of cameras and the cheers of the audience created an energetic atmosphere. He stepped onto the stage, and as the spotlight hit him, a powerful feeling surged within. "Hello, New York," Snoop Dogg began, his voice resonating through the microphone. "Today, I'm not just here to perform. I'm here to share a story about the discrimination I faced on my flight here." The audience fell silent, listening intently. Snoop recounted the tense moments at the airport, the discrimination he had encountered, and the sense of injustice he had felt. He shared that music had become a source of strength and hope for him, and he wanted everyone to know they were not alone in the fight against discrimination. "Music has the power to connect us," he said, his eyes shining. "It can help us break down barriers, and when we stand together, we can create change." As he began to perform his new rap, the atmosphere in the venue became electric. The powerful beats and emotionally charged lyrics captivated the audience. He rapped about his experiences, the discrimination, and the hope for a better future. Each line felt like a heartbeat, conveying a strong message of unity and justice. The audience started to rise, clapping and chanting his name. Other artists in the crowd joined in, creating an atmosphere filled with energy and support. Snoop felt the strength of the community, and it made him proud. He was not just an artist, he was part of a movement fighting for equality and justice. When the rap concluded, Snoop Dogg stood on stage, breathing heavily but filled with exhilaration. He looked out at the audience, seeing emotional expressions, smiles, and waving hands. He knew that his message had touched the hearts of many. "Thank you all," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Let's stand up against discrimination together. We can create change." The audience erupted in applause, and Snoop felt as if he were at the pinnacle of his career. He had not just performed a song, he had conveyed a message, a call to action. He knew that music could create change, and he had proven that right on this stage. After the performance, Snoop Dogg received numerous congratulations from fellow artists and fans. They approached him, sharing their own stories of discrimination and how music had helped them overcome challenges. He felt a deep connection with everyone around him, and it made him realize he was not alone in this fight. "Thank you for sharing your story," one fan said, their eyes filled with emotion. "Your rap touched my heart. I will never forget this." Snoop Dogg smiled, feeling happy to know that his message had been received. He understood that this was just the beginning. He would continue to use his music to convey messages of equality and justice, and he would never stop fighting for those who had no voice. As the event came to a close, Snoop Dogg left the stage with a sense of fulfillment. He had accomplished what he set out to do, not just perform, but also create change. He knew that the fight against racial discrimination was far from over, but he was ready to continue his journey. With each song, each performance, he would keep spreading his message, and he would never give up. As he stepped out of the event venue, the lights of New York City shone brightly, and Snoop Dogg felt as if he were entering a new chapter in his life. He was ready for the challenges ahead, and he knew that music would always be his most powerful weapon in the fight for justice and equality. After the music event in New York, Snoop Dogg felt a new energy surging within him. The performance was not only an artistic success, but also a turning point in his life. He realized that with his platform and influence, he could do much more to fight for equality and combat racial discrimination. He decided it was time to take action. Snoop began planning a series of charity concerts, where all proceeds would be donated to organizations fighting for the rights of people of color and minority groups. He wanted to create a space not just for entertainment but also for education and raising awareness about the issues the community faced. Music can change the world, he thought, and I will use it to make a difference. He started reaching out to other artists. Those he knew shared the same passion and commitment to the fight for social justice. Calls and messages were sent out, and soon a lineup of well-known artists agreed to participate in these charity concerts. They all understood that the power of music could bring about positive change in society. Snoop Dogg also got involved in anti-racism campaigns, from signing petitions to participating in protests. He didn't just want to talk about discrimination, he wanted to take action against it. He knew that although he was a famous artist, many others were still facing discrimination and injustice in their daily lives. He felt a responsibility to speak up for them. One of the first charity concerts Snoop organized was at a large stadium in Los Angeles. He invited many famous artists to join, from longtime friends to emerging talents. As the concert date approached, the atmosphere in the stadium became electric. Thousands of fans gathered to show their support, and Snoop felt a sense of pride as he saw the community come together. When Snoop stepped onto the stage, the bright lights illuminated him, and the cheers of the audience erupted like a symphony. He began the concert by sharing why he was organizing the event. "Today we are not just here to enjoy music," he said, his voice strong and full of emotion. "We are here to stand up against racial discrimination and support equality for all." He continued to perform his famous songs, but this time each song carried a powerful message about unity and hope. The audience not only danced to the rhythms but also chanted slogans in support of equality. Snoop felt the strength of the community, and it made him feel like he was exactly where he belonged. After finishing his performance, Snoop Dogg invited representatives from various nonprofit organizations onto the stage. They shared about their work and how the funds raised from the concert would be used to support those in need. Snoop felt proud to know that his music not only brought joy, but could also create real change in the lives of many. "We need to keep fighting," he told the audience. "Each of us can do something to help. Stand up, speak your truth, and let's create a better world together." Snoop Dogg's charity concerts quickly attracted media attention and public interest. He became a symbol for the anti-racism movement, and his voice resonated everywhere. He received numerous invitations to participate in talk shows, interviews, and panels where he could share his views on equality and justice. Snoop also began collaborating with social activists and nonprofit organizations to host educational events where he could talk to young people about the importance of standing up against discrimination. He wanted to inspire the younger generation, helping them realize that they could make a difference in their communities. "We cannot remain silent," he emphasized during one workshop. "We need to take action. Each person can be a part of the change. Use your voice, use your power." Snoop Dogg understood that the fight against racial discrimination was not an easy task, but he also knew that with the support of the community, they could create change. He committed to continuing to raise his voice, not just for himself, but for all those who were oppressed. Looking back at what he had accomplished, Snoop felt proud of the progress he had made. He knew that his music had touched the hearts of many, and he would not stop striving to create positive change in society. He would continue to organize charity concerts, participate in anti-racism campaigns, and use his platform to raise awareness about important issues. "This is just the beginning," he thought. "There is still much work to be done, and I will not stop until everyone is respected and treated fairly." With determination and faith in the power of music, Snoop Dogg continued his journey, becoming a powerful voice in the fight for justice and equality.